Yo, 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 guys. Gamer's Goon here today, and you see I got a big old smile on my face. The Houston Texans won. And you might be looking at me, what does that mean? I clicked on here for the Chicago Bears, and you are right. This is very important for the Chicago Bears because with today's loss to Minnesota and a Texans victory, the Chicago Bears are the number one pick in this year's draft. Now, people might be saying, why are you smiling about having a bad season? Look at the team that we surrounded ourselves with this year. A lot of these guys were fighting to make a case for their next signing, their next position in the NFL, their next stay, wherever that might be. We traded big names: Roquan Smith, Khalil Mack, Robert Quinn. This season was never going to be a season of us competing to be a playoff team. This season was all about the rebuild. This season was all about establishing what we can put forth for what we believe to be the future next to Justin Fields. And today, that finally was executed with the Texans win. By Texas winning, we guarantee that we either get Will Anderson, the premier edge rusher in this year's draft, Jalen Carter, the premier defensive tackle in this year's draft, which, if you look at our pass rush this year, we could desperately use either of them. Our guy that led this team in sacks, Jaquan Brisker, a safety with 4 sacks. When we get a guy like Will Anderson, who, by the way, this year had a down year, getting 10 plus sacks. This was his down year, having 10 sacks. If you can go get Will Anderson, or if you can go get Jalen Carter, who is one of the most physical defensive tackles in the entire draft, why not? Because you look at that defensive line, you look at that defense as a whole, besides a couple pieces, they were the reason why we lost a lot of games this year. The offense came to play, and by the way, the offense has a long way to go. The offense is not by any means good right now, but they were able to put up 20, 30 points there for a period of time, for a 6-7 week period. We're getting around 30 points a game with who? With who? Khalil Herbert was out. David Montgomery was on and off. We saw maybe some Treston Ebner here and there. We saw some Darrington Evans here or there. These are guys that we don't know whether or not they're going to have positions long term on the Chicago Bears. Kwame St. Brown, who we did re-sign, and N'Keal Harry, who we still have to either re-sign or decide to let walk. Byron Pringle, who did not play a lot of this season. We have plenty of guys. If you look up Dante Pettis, you have plenty of guys on that offense that don't necessarily have solidified spots. But what the Bears do have is $120 million going into this free agency class. Granted, they don't have any star receivers, but you could pair a lower class free agent receivers that aren't necessarily the superstars. Maybe we are in play for superstars. Maybe we are playing on the Devontae Adams playing field, the DeAndre Hopkins playing field if they do decide to trade those guys. But that's not really what I'm focused on when it comes to receivers. I'm thinking of going after maybe like somebody, not necessarily the first guy that comes to mind, like a Jacoby Myers or maybe like a DJ Chark, bring him in and just add depth and let Mooney and Claypool do their thing next year, but add guys that should be on a team, not guys that are fighting to be on a team. And that was what we had a lot of this year, is a lot of guys that were fighting to stay on a team. And then maybe in the draft, depending on what we do with the first overall pick, if we trade it down and we get an extra first-round pick or a second-round pick, maybe we go get a Quentin Johnson. Maybe we are in Kayshon Butte range. Maybe we get a Jackson Smith and Jigba. Maybe we play for one of those guys, or maybe we wait around and maybe second, third round go after a guy like Jalen Hyatt, high upside kid that had a good season for Tennessee this season. But the Bears have a lot of options now that they're number one. They control everything. There's plenty of teams, and I will bring up a set of, what's it called? I'm going to bring up the standings. We're going to name teams that could use quarterbacks. The Texans. Obviously, they might be able to need a quarterback. The Broncos, I'm going to say they probably don't go quarterback because they're still committed to Russell Wilson. Whether or not they agree with Russell Wilson's output doesn't really matter because they are financially responsible for Russell Wilson regardless. Cardinals, they won't need one, but the Colts, I believe they have the 5th pick right now. Maybe that changes a little bit. Maybe they get a little bit earlier. I don't know. But the Colts are a potential option. You look at the Raiders, another potential option inside the top 10. The Falcons, an option inside the top 10. The Saints, an option inside of the top 10. You start to see where I'm going with this. You have options in the top 10. The Titans might be an option. The Panthers, the Jets, the Commanders. There's a lot of options on teams that could need a quarterback. And thing is, we got QB1 already. We got Justin Fields. We don't need a quarterback. We don't need to select a quarterback. So we get to do what we want to do at the top of the draft. We either force somebody to jump the Texans before the Texans get their pick between Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud. And if somebody wants to, if somebody has a definite preference, say the Colts have a preference that they want Bryce Young instead of C.J. Stroud, they have to jump the Texans now. They have to jump the Texans. So who do they have to trade with? Us. They got to come to us. And we gotta give them that. And who knows? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. I don't know. But what I can say is that we control everything. We can either stay put and draft a Will Anderson or a Jalen Carter at number 1. Or we force the Colts to give us their 2 first-round picks, some other stuff, and we get to select. A little bit later, we still might be in range for Jalen Carter and Will Anderson, and we pick up another first-round pick. That would be massive. That would be the ideal scenario here. The ideal scenario is to trade down 1 or 2 picks and convince one of these teams that they need to trade up for their quarterback. They need to trade up for Bryce Young. They need to trade up for C.J. Stroud. And the next team takes the other guy, and then we're sitting at 3 and draft Will Anderson or Jalen Carter. That is the ideal scenario. And we pick up a first-round pick in the process, and probably more. A second-round pick, a third-round pick, maybe a next year's first-round pick, something of that sort, where we get we're going to have, if we trade this pick, I expect 2 picks in this year's class, and potentially a future pick, or if it's not a future pick, a pick on the second day of the draft, whether that's round 2 or round 3. I don't think that we are going to necessarily hold the quarterbacks hostage and just not accept calls whatsoever. I don't think Ryan Poles is that kind of guy. Ryan Poles will listen. He will listen. He did it last year. He will do it again this year. He will listen to what anybody has to offer for that first overall pick. And when the Bears decide whether or not they want to draft at 1 or whether they trade back, I have full confidence that we are not going to move out of the top 10, and we should. I'm not saying this is a guarantee because I don't want this to come back and bite. We should end up with either Jalen Carter or Will Anderson. I prefer Will Anderson personally, but Jalen Carter would not be a bad consolation prize, especially if what you have to give up in order to pass on Will Anderson and you just end up, like, say we trade a 4, and we ended up with Jalen Carter because Will Anderson got picked at 3. It wouldn't be a bad consolation prize if you get Jalen Carter, another first-round pick, and let's say a round 2 pick, where you can go out and maybe in round 2 you can solidify the receiver position with a Jalen Hyatt, or you could solidify, maybe if Devin Montgomery rocks, maybe you can solidify a running back position if you don't think Khalil Herbert's the long-term answer. Maybe you can go and solidify yourself and get another tight end like a Dalton Kincaid, or you can go get yourself one of those second-round, third-round tight ends, or Maybe we aren't doing that. Maybe we go and we draft a Jack Campbell, a hard-nosed linebacker that helps lead the defense. Imagine Jack Campbell and Jalen Carter in the same draft class. That would be stacked. Will Anderson and Jack Campbell in the same draft class. That would be stacked. Maybe we fall down and we get Will Anderson and Brian Breeze. That would be also fine with me. Maybe we fall down and we have to draft, let's say, potentially like a defensive back. I wouldn't be opposed to getting Devon Witherspoon. I wouldn't. There's a lot of options for the Bears. Maybe in middle first round we get Peter Skoronski. Maybe we get Paris Johnson. There's a lot of potential massive game-changing moves that could be made by Ryan Poles from the time from now until that draft. And I personally will be very invested up until that point, because the last time my team had the number 1 overall pick in overall sports was Derrick Rose in Chicago. Obviously, I was super young at that point and did not really follow the draft nearly as much as what I do now. All I know is, oh, we got that really good guy. But now you're watching from the perspective that I am, and especially after being part of the college football season this last season, part of the Oregon football team staff, it is going to be massive to see what happens. It's going to be massive for Chicago to see what happens. And I want in this video, I've done a lot of talking, but I also do want to show you guys a little bit of what I am talking about. And we are going to start that here in just a second, when we're going to talk about who I believe the Bears should target. We're going to do a full 7-round mock draft right here, right live, and we're going to talk through all the possible scenarios. But as of the time of this recording, this is the current draft order. And some of these, like if you look at the Broncos, they don't hold their pick. The Seahawks hold their pick. But you look at some of these, like they don't have this pick, but this is the correct order on who owns each pick. And hopefully PFF knows what I'm trying to do, because this is how it should work. But we're the Chicago Bears, and we are entering the draft. We're going to do it. All right, so I lowered my my face so it's smaller in the corner so that you can see everything that we talk about. But obviously, the Texans, look at all these teams that are interested in this pick. And we can hold it hostage. If we want to go to the Seahawks and we want to say, give us 3 and give us 20 and we give you 1, we can do it. Am I going to do that necessarily? No. But we can go to the Lions or the Colts. We can go to the Colts, who have the division rival, and we can do something like that and get multiple first-round selections in future years. Or we could go to the Lions at 6. And the Lions, if they they have the Rams pick. The Rams could move back up, so we could get something like that from them. And then maybe like a 2nd-round pick or a 3rd-round pick. But in this specific video, we are not going to go and do these trades. We will talk about those more as the time goes forward. But you look at the Raiders, 2 early picks as well. Not first-rounders, but there are, like, I believe, do the Eagles have 2 firsts? Yeah, the Eagles have 2 firsts. You get to, like, I believe the Jets don't, actually. I thought they did. But you can go to a Raiders. You can go to a Lions. Lions have 2 firsts. You can go to the Colts, who have an early 2nd-round pick. You can go to the Seahawks, who have 2 firsts and an early 3rd. I'm not going to go and base anything off of that. Like, look, already the Seahawks want to potentially trade up. So if we wanted to do something like that, we could do it. If we wanted to force their hand and take 3 and 20 and maybe slide in like a... Obviously, I don't think this is necessarily going to be enough for Ryan Poles to begin with, but we could. But I'm not doing the trades. We will do trades as the season the offseason progresses. we're not going to talk about the trades, but we will talk about who I believe, if the Bears sit pat, what they do. And it doesn't let you click on him, but with the first overall pick in the 2023 NFL Draft, the Chicago Bears select edge rusher Will Anderson out of the University of Alabama. And like I told you, we were going to stay pat. We simmed up until our next pick, which is at pick 54. But pick 54, obviously it's significant. It's 53 spots from where we are. That is to do with the Chase Claypool trade that we traded our second round pick for, which will end up being the 32nd pick in this year's draft, effectively the first overall pick, or the 32nd. So effectively, we would have 2 first-round picks. Obviously, we're not doing trades in this one, but I do like the idea of a Dalton Kincaid, Cole Kmet combo. I do like that, but when you look at it, and at least the way I'm looking at it is, this is by far my top target. Jalen Hyatt is by far my top target once we start talking about offense. I love Jalen Hyatt's game. I love everything about Jalen Hyatt's game. But we also need linebackers. And I don't know if Jack Campbell's still here. He is still here. And then we also need an offensive lineman, potentially, like a Cooper Beebe. But when I look at it, the way that at least my mind goes, you got to go with best player available. And I know PFF doesn't have Jack Campbell, best player available. I think that's a little bit due to age, but I do think he would be a great addition. You get Will Anderson, who's going to go get you the sacks. Jack Campbell, who can run your defense. That defense is starting to look nasty in Chicago. And then we scroll back up to our pick, Jack Campbell out of Iowa. So with the 54th pick, the Chicago Bears select Jack Campbell. And now we're at 64. And with 64, I want to go and get our receiver. We've talked about it a little bit just on our last pick, first pick in the 3rd round. I can't let Jalen Hyatt fall much further. So with the 64th pick, Jalen Hyatt is a Chicago Bear. And now we're back at pick 96. We have about 6 picks left in this year's draft. So we've covered our linebacker concern. We've covered our receiver concern. We've covered our edge rusher concern. And we're kind of looking at a defensive tackle here, maybe like a Jacqueline Roy, Byron Young. Or maybe we're looking at like a defensive back. Maybe we're trying to go there. Or potentially we could be in the running back tight end range. And there are some decent tight ends still available. Cade Stover I do like. But I'm not in love with anybody here necessarily. But we will look at the offensive lineman because personally I do like Darnell Wright. But I think we probably don't draft two Volunteers back to back. I do like Olusegun Oluwatimi. From what I've seen from him, I have watched a few Michigan games and I was impressed with him. But I think we're a little bit out of range for him. So we're gonna look at the running backs and see maybe if we see a guy that we want to put in here and put next to Khalil Herbert and potentially David Montgomery. I'm going off the assumption David Montgomery is not going to get re-signed. And when I think of a guy that if you're not re-signing David Montgomery, you want a workhorse, it's Chase Brown. Now, I know it's a little bit early. We've done that a few times here, but I think you go Chase Brown. You got a guy that you know can be a workhorse. And look at that. Our center, Olusegun Oluwatimi, is still there. Once again, I think you have to replace the center position, and that is a perfect replacement if you ask me. I'm going to look at some tight ends. Not in love with anybody. Not in love with anybody right now. But I still could see us maybe panning out a little bit more linebacker situation. Henry To'oTo'o is not going to be here. And I kind of know that. But I'm going off the assumption that this is how the board falls. if I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, how do we get this? We get Jack Sanborn with Henry To'oTo'o, with Jack Campbell. That is a deadly linebacking core that lets you maybe push away Matt Adams or put Matt Adams as a backup or something of that nature. I would love that. So I'm going to draft Henry To'oTo'o. Now we're at pick 160. In pick 160, I think we're probably going to start having to look back in that interior of the defensive line, and we're still going to need to look for maybe a cornerback. And as you can see, there's not many guys that are just like guys that you necessarily jump off the board for. But to me, maybe, and you're going to have to hear me out, Jonah Tavai, San Diego State. Now, this kid, he's big, obviously, but he also didn't necessarily play at the highest level at San Diego State, so we'll see whether or not he transitions into being a good defensive tackle for the Bears, but we're going to go off on a limb and we're going to draft Jonah, but Jalen Redmond would have been ideal there. And we are back at I want to look at tight ends now. We're at 184. We're at pick 184. We have 2 more picks. I think we potentially look towards a tight end, and a guy that I think might get drafted a little bit higher than people think. Like you can see 200. I do think Zach Kuntz will get drafted, and I will take a flyer on him. It's a 6th-round pick. It's not that big, but we're going to do it. And then last but not least, we want to look at corners, and as you can see, there's 3 corners left. I don't really want to commit to any of those guys. But let's just go through here and look who maybe Nick Broker's still there. I do like him. Mohamed Diabate, I did get to see him play in person this year. I do like him. But I think maybe you just go offensive line and fill in potentially a guard position. I do like Braxton Jones at the tackle position. But maybe you do go guard. Maybe you do go guard in Nick Broker, and you solidify this draft once and for all. So let's see what it grades us. It probably won't grade us the greatest because I did draft a little bit of people out of place. But if we stay where we're put, this wouldn't be a bad draft in my opinion. They'll probably grade it like a C, maybe a B, somewhere around there. But this is taking a minute to grade it. Yeah, you see Jack Campbell. They hated Jack Campbell, but they loved Will Anderson. They hated Chase Brown. They hated Jalen Hyatt. They were somewhat fans of those 2 picks. They didn't like Jonah. They didn't like Zach, and they did not like Nick Broker. But, in my opinion, this is still a pretty good draft. You get your probable sack leader in Will Anderson. You get your linebacker of the future in Jack Campbell. You get a big body receiver. You get a workhorse running back. Assuming David Montgomery is not coming back, you replace your center position. You get another linebacker to potentially push Matthew Adams down the lineup. You get a defensive tackle that is going to be potentially some boom or bust potential there. Not really high stakes in him, but maybe he comes in and does something for us. Zach Kuntz, I think he's definitely an upgrade over our backup tight ends, but once again, he is going to be one of those guys that isn't necessarily a lock, but he's a trial guy that might be able to run twin tight ends with Cole Kmet. And then Nick Broker, you have nothing to lose. You got to try to get a guard. But like I said, we have the whole world in front of us. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching. It was a fun video. Obviously, with the Chicago Bears having the 1st overall pick, I will be covering the draft very, very much heading into it because I am more than thrilled to say the Chicago Bears had the 1st overall pick and we can control whatever happens in the draft this year. But thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.